in the midst of a story about Lazarus and Jesus. Jesus, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. "Take away the stone," he said. "But Lord," said Martha, the sister of the dead man, "by this time there is a bad odor, for he has been there 4 days." Then Jesus said, "Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone. Then Jesus looked up and said, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me." When he had said this, Jesus called in a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." The dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen and a cloth around his face. And Jesus said to them, "Take off the grave clothes and let him go." And then I invite you to turn ahead to 1 Corinthians 3, where we'll read the first 15 verses of 1 Corinthians 3. Beginning at verse 1. "Brethren, I could not address you as spiritual, but as worldly, mere infants in Christ. I gave you milk, not solid food, for you were not yet ready for it. Indeed, you are still not ready. You are still worldly. For since there is jealousy and quarreling among you, are you not worldly? Are you not acting like mere humans? For when one says, 'I follow Paul,' and another, 'I follow Apollos,' are you not mere humans? What, after all, is Apollos? And what is Paul? Only servants through whom you came to believe, as the Lord has assigned to each his task. I planted the seed, Apollos watered it, but God made it grow. So neither he who plants nor the one who waters is anything, but only God who makes things grow. The one who plants and the one who waters have one purpose, and each will be rewarded according to their labor. For we are God's fellow workers. You are God's field, God's building. By the grace God has given me, I laid a foundation as an expert builder, and someone else is building on it. But each one should be careful how they build, for no one can lay any foundation other than the one already laid, which is Jesus Christ. If anyone builds on this foundation using gold, silver, costly stones, wood, hay, or straw, their work shall be shown for what it is, because the day will bring it to light. It will be revealed with fire, and the fire will test the quality of each one's work. If what they have built survives, they will receive their reward. If it is burned up, they will suffer loss. They themselves will be saved, but only as one escaping through the flames." People of God, this is the word of the Lord. Recently, I played this game, the game of Anomia, with my family. Seems simple enough. You flip a card, and you have to come up with a word faster than your opponent. Sorry, I was too fast on this one. For example, the category that came up when we were playing was acronym, and so you have to come up with an acronym fast. And all I could think of each time this particular card for acronym came up was SCUBA, right? Self-contained underwater breathing apparatus. I wished at the time that I could have remembered a lot of better acronyms, like this one, for those who don't really enjoy math. I also really liked this. This is a text between a mom and a child. "Mom, what does IDKLY and TTYL mean?" "I don't know. Love you. Talk to you later." "Okay, I'll ask your sister." And of course, there's the AAAA, the American Association Against Acronym Abuse. But there's a 3-letter acronym that I want to pay attention. I've talked about this one before. And it comes from the field of medicine. FTT, failure to thrive. And this is an acronym that gets entered sometimes on the chart of an infant who, for otherwise unknown reasons, seems to be unable to gain weight or grow. Sometimes doctors guess that failure to thrive happens when a parent or a caregiver is depressed, and that depression seems to kind of get passed down. Or sometimes something seems to be off in an infant's metabolism for reasons that nobody can understand. And so FTT is this kind of mysterious phrase that sounds like an explanation, but really doesn't explain much at all. Dallas Willard, who's a great writer about Christian spirituality, he writes that although we've tended to think about the word salvation as the forgiveness of sins or the escape from punishment, salvation really actually has a much more robust and profound meaning for the writers of Scripture. He writes, "The simple and wholly adequate word for salvation in the New Testament is life. I am come that they might have life, and they might have it more abundantly. He that hath the Son hath life. Even when we were dead through our trespasses, God made us alive together with Christ." Now, on the flip side, failing to thrive is a part of our condition as humans. Right? Thrive's this word that's full of life. It's a shalom kind of word. It's what we were intended to do. Like a flower that just keeps stubbornly pushing through a crack in a sidewalk. It's why we pause and wonder at a human being's first steps or first words, and it's maybe why we ought to wonder at every step and every word. Thriving is what God saw when He made life, and He saw that it was good. Thrive is actually the first command. Be fruitful and multiply. Now, often what happens is people who have dreams for their life when they are young, over time, they can give up on those dreams. And writer and artist Gordon Mackenzie talks about visiting a kindergarten class and asking them, "Who here is an artist?" And guess what? Every single kindergarten kid raises his and her hand. Every kindergarten thinks they're an artist. Sadly, he talks about doing this also at the third grade level, and only about half of the third grade kids raise their hands. And then by the time that the students are 12 years old, only a couple of kind of hands kind of wave a little bit in the air. I remember talking once to an upbeat, committed Christian, a loyal church member. He was, to use Paul's language in 1 Corinthians, he was built on the foundation of Jesus Christ. And he said to me, "I have this picture in my mind of what Christians ought to be like, but then there's me. Why isn't my Christian life kind of more dynamic, more lively?" When he first became a Christian, there was this rush of passion and dedication and enthusiasm, but for whatever reason there came to be this FTT, this failure to thrive. Why isn't my Christian life more dynamic? And this may in part be your own question. At some point, I'm sure it has been and will be Nathan's question. And I admit that I've wrestled with this question myself. Think with me for a moment about half-healed people. People who were healed and they're therefore quite different from what they were before, but the process kind of remains unfinished, half-healed. Not sick anymore, but not totally healthy yet either. People who can walk, but who can't walk all that well because they still have some sort of thing crippling them. Bones maybe not properly mended. And in John 11, we find this story of the resurrection of Lazarus. And earlier in the chapter, Jesus made this bold assertion. He says, "I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live even though they die." And it's in this chapter that we learned that Jesus stands outside the tomb of Lazarus, and he yells into the tomb, "Lazarus, come out!" And he does. And it's this story of a supernatural event and Lazarus coming back to life. But then there's this kind of poignant element to the story. And you can kind of skip right over it pretty easily. After Jesus raises him, it says that the dead man came out, and his hands and his feet were wrapped in strips of linen, and there was a cloth around his face. And so just imagine, have that picture in your mind of this man standing here at the opening of this tomb. He's alive. I mean, he's been dead for 4 days, but now he's alive. But he's still kind of all wrapped up, right? His hands and his feet and his face, and so he can't really see. He can't move. He can't speak. And all this residue of the state of death kind of still is wrapped around him and literally clinging to him. And so Jesus says to them, take off the grave clothes and let him go. And finally, he's going to be all that Jesus has raised him to be. And there's kind of a similar parallel thing going on in the story that we read in Mark 8. Right? Jesus encounters there a blind man who's begging for Jesus to touch him, and so that this man might be healed of his blindness. And Jesus puts some spit in his hands, and he rubs them together, and he puts it on the man's eyes, and then he asks him, do you see anything? And the man looks up, and he says, I see people looking around. They look like trees walking around. Well, we look at that, and we go, well, that's not very good, right? That's not very good sight. And so once more, Jesus puts his hands on the man's eyes, and then his eyes were opened, and his sight is restored, and he sees everything clearly. And so apparently early on, he was healed so he could see, but he was only kind of half healed. He could not see clearly. He wasn't yet all that Jesus healed him to be. And I think that same kind of half-healedness is true for Christians when Paul addresses them in 1 Corinthians. Right? There are people there that are believers. They've built their hope on this one sure foundation, Jesus Christ. They're healed people, so to speak, but some are building with gold and silver and precious stones, and others are building with wood and hay and straw. I mean, some of those building materials are much more valuable than others. Some will last, some will not. And so Paul seems to point out that Christians who are half-healed, well, they'll be saved, but all that they've worked for will just kind of fade away. It'll be lost. And he points to those who are fully healed and who have this reward of evidence of a life well lived. And you might wonder, well, why is this so important? What does this matter? So what? So what if we aren't always up to what we ought to be in our Christian life? I think there's a number of reasons why we ought to pay attention to this. And the first is because this is really exactly what Satan wants for Christians. I mean, if he cannot be successful in prohibiting people from becoming Christians, right? That's his first choice. If he can't do that, then he'd much prefer to see us be kind of half-healed, weak, unproductive. And the second problem is this kind of condition really produces Christians who are very frustrated. Right? Imagine Lazarus standing there still all wrapped up, unable to move, and saying, so what's so good about being raised from the dead? It's not all it cracked up to be. I'm just kind of standing here. It's kind of a zombie, right? And for that blind man mumbling about the fact that it's no good being healed, I mean, I'm only half healed. I can't even read. And maybe in some ways you're here this morning too, and you have your own frustrations, your own sense of the level of your own mediocre Christian life. There's another problem is that it kind of stunts it stalls our growth. Right? We say that Christ has redeemed us, but not only so that we can be his children, but so that we can be his growing and fruit-bearing children. Right? If we don't desire more, then we're just not going to desire the spiritual growth that God expects of us. And so this condition that we are calling half-healed, it also has this problem in that we become very poor witnesses